Okay.
We're still letting you drop through.
6:30, we'll get started. Ask you please to stand rise, pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank everybody for coming out this evening. First beginning of our minutes from May 12th. Everybody had a chance to look at them today. Any corrections, deletions? Have a motion to accept. Second, favor? 5-0. Treasurer's report.
There's emailed out as well.
Now everybody had a chance to look at them.
We have the wind claim that we have to go through Tilly, and we have the spring settlement for the 300 on Tip area and Stewart Street. And the phone line.
Second. I'll second. 9 seconds. All in favor? 5-0. Old business, sewer and jail. Anybody have any updates?
We're moving forward.
Moving forward?
Yeah, we've got a meeting Friday morning to discuss it in more detail and sign some paperwork.
Have you got the report back from?
Yes. According to that, it's there, we can do it. We just have to get from point A to point B.
Anything else? Solar project, anything?
We've met with representatives of 2 companies and waiting to hear when they want to be put on the public agenda for kicking off the project.
Suppose they haven't contacted us to see us first.
Yes, they are, they know that that's the procedure.
New business, 2022 budget.
It's the top of the horizontal treasurer's report that you have, has those categories that we have in our 2021 budget and the amounts at the top.
Deanne, could you speak louder?
Speak loud.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
People in the back can't hear you if I can barely hear you.
Okay. I was telling them that the horizontal treasurer sheet had our categories and the amounts for the 2021 budget. And I asked one of the commissioners if the lit amount for 2022 would be comparable. Shelley had said Baker Tilly hopes to have revenue stream figures to departments by the 15th of this month, is that correct? Close.
That's what,
Yes.
Hayes should do.
Yes. So we should have an idea of what the lit budget would be, and then it's up to the commissioners to set their percentage to give to this board.
Any discussion about the budget? Keep it the same. I don't foresee any changes or anything move around. Got a motion to keep it the same. Second. Bob seconds. All in favor? So unless the money comes back a little different, we can move things around at the time.
I'm Jason Sullivan, Thank you for having me here this evening. Asked to come tonight to present the annual report to the Redevelopment Commission. We've done this for 2 or 3 years now, where kind of a, I want to say new requirement, but it's been around for a few years now, where the Redevelopment Commission is supposed to have an annual meeting, invite all the overlapping tax units, and then provide some key pieces of information, kind of overall plan, what the tip allocation areas are in place for. illustrative budget, and then, kind of impact of what the allocation areas have on the local revenue tax units. So I know I prepared this, PowerPoint presentation, for the commission in the past. I thought I'd just kind of go over this again with the updated numbers. We'll go through these questions, these schedules, but if you have any questions as we go through them, this is kind of a good opportunity for us to kind of talk about things and kind of brainstorm and shoot ideas off one another. So feel free to stop me anytime. I'd be happy to answer any questions or address any questions or thoughts that you might have. Starting on page 3, the first allocation area that we're talking about is the Stewart Street allocation area. How it was originally created and then when it was expanded. So originally created in 2003, then also expanded in December of that same year. And that area has a 30-year life. So you could end it earlier if you'd like to, but it can't go beyond 30 years. So by statute, it will end April 2033, and the expansion will end December 2033. The estimated tax increment, you can see in 2020, we collected $264,000. We're estimating just a little over $60,000. So the taxpayers in the allocation area are paying the taxes and paying them on time. You can see in 2021, we're estimating the tax return to be about $60,940. You should be collecting your spring settlement here in the next couple of weeks.
We got it earlier.
Was it, you know what it is? Was it close to 30,000? About half that. So I anticipate they receive.
$32,672.35.
So they collected a little over half, so that's what we anticipate. So as we pay all the taxes for the first settlement. So, that's good to hear. Page 4. If you remember, the TIP area was originally created to provide an incentive for robustness for the building. Bonds were issued and purchased by the company, and then the tax increment payable just from that building was used to pay back those bonds. Those bonds are matured, so that's no longer outstanding. Additional improvements or capital projects that you funded from the TIP area were drainage improvements that benefit the area, and then the road improvements that we've listed there. As far as the illustrative budget, turn to page 5. Again, looking at about $61,000 being collected this year, we just kind of carried that forward. Again, just for illustrative purposes, we put $10,000 allocated for other services and charges, professional fees, and then had allowance for $25,000 for capital outlays, for capital projects that come in front of the board throughout the year. You get funds to pay for that. So even if that budget came to fruition, with the $60,000 of revenue, $35,000 of expenses, still have $25,000 remaining for other projects that may come in front of you. You can see the beginning balance there that you have, and you can see that growing a little bit over time. And with that balance and with that future revenue, that can pay for the projects that are listed on the next page. Again, when you created the plan, you had projects in mind that you wanted to fund from the tax increment collected in this area. So here's a few of the road improvements, lighting improvements, and then also additional drainage improvements that the board can use that future TIP for. Any questions on the Stewart Street? The next area is the 300 North area.
Going back to that, what would be the advantage of knocking it off the time that it's up?
I'll get to that. That's the last schedule.
Okay.
So good segue though. The next schedule is 300 North. It was created in 2006. So it also has a 30-year life. So by statute, it will end in 2036 unless it's like in that early. If you look at the bottom there, the actual collections in 2020 was $88,312. We actually anticipated that you collect about $117,000 of taxes last year. And the reason for the shortfall is Breckenridge paid their fall taxes late. So they haven't paid them. So you should, in your spring settlement, you should get higher than normal settlement, for the payment of taxes.
It was $91,185.30,
Okay.
which is more than half of your.
So that makes sense because half, if you're showing 121,000, so half of about 60,000 plus the 29 they didn't pay is the 90,000. So, but it tells me that everyone paid their spring taxes and paid one time, so that's good. Projects funded from the revenues that the Real Commission is paid up to date. Utility improvements, the water, and then also additional road improvements in this area as well have all been funded from TIF, generated from the 300 North allocation area.
What improvements are we planning on doing in Northwood Drive? You know,
Those were already done. That was when it was narrow and very bumpy, and it was repaved, redone, and the little S curve before you get to Breckenridge was
so
solid done.
what we
Yeah, on page 9 here, these are projects that have already been completed. Page 10 looks at an illustrated cash flow for 300 North again, just keeping the $121,000 of revenue constant, allowing an allowance for other services and charges and capital outlays. You can see the estimated TIF remaining is about $36,000. Again, kind of looking at the beginning balance as of January 1 of this year. And that continues to grow. And to be able to fund the projects, the future projects that are listed on page 11. So we talked about funding additional utility improvements, potentially providing economic development incentives that may come across your desk, additional road improvements, public infrastructure, and then also environmental studies for potential future projects. So the question was asked, what is the impact of ending an area? So this, we kind of just put this graph in here. This is really kind of our one-on-one TIF one-on-one graph. So as you know, when you create TIF areas, all the assessed value that's there before you create the TIF area, we call that the base assessed value. So all the property taxes that are generated from the base, which is this blue, that continues to flow through to fund the budget of the county, the school, the township, the city, if the city TIF area or library. But what you hope is you create the TIF area and you have growth, you have new development, and you capture that new development. And that's the green, that's the incremental or new assessed value. So the taxes generated from that new assessed value is what you collect. That's the tax increment that goes into your allocation fund. You kind of think of TIF as kind of like your 401k, long-term investment. You collect that revenue, put it back into the allocation area with more infrastructure, more incentives, and that just continues to grow. Your revenue increases, your assessed value that you're capturing increases, and then once all your projects are funded, or the project ends, all that new assessed value gets added to the tax base of all the elected tax units. So if you turn the page, the next two pages I kind of showed what would look like if you were to end both TIF areas. Now your allocation areas cover two different taxing districts, the city of Sullivan and Hamilton Township. I'll just kind of stick with Hamilton or Sullivan City, page 14. So if you look at the top of page 14, this is the 2021 information. Now, I'll kind of just stay with the county. But if you look at the top line, kind of the far right, the county's budget is payable from property taxes, and we're going to get in this more in the next presentation. But the amount of the county's budget is payable from property taxes is $7,953,000. That's the levy. This county can't levy any more property taxes than that because the county's at their maximum levy. So it doesn't matter if you have a huge condo plant come into the county and bring in $100 million of new assessed value. The county can't levy any more new taxes because they're at the max. And that increases by a certain percentage each year, but it's dictated by the state. It's the same percentage for Sullivan County, as is for Vigo County, as is for Adams County or Gibson County. So that's kind of dictated. They can go below that, but they can't levy more than that. And it's the same for the school, the townships, library, everyone else. So the tax base, the assessed value, the middle column there is at $985 million. That's all the assessed value in the county that's not included in the TIP area, because that assessed value is set aside and captured by the Redevelopment Commission. This is all the real property, land, building, equipment, utility property that's not in the TIP area. That's $985 million in Sullivan County. So it takes, if you look at the left, it takes an 80-cent tax rate multiplied by that tax base to generate $7.9 million of property taxes to fund the county's budget. So you do this for the same thing for the township, for the school corporation, for the library, and for the city. You can see they all have their own tax rates. So all their tax rates add up to the $4.30 that you see there. So you take that $4.30 times the captured AB that's in the allocation area, and for City of Sullivan, it's the $2.1 million. So that generates $90,000 of gross taxes. Just like property owners that are outside the allocation area, those inside the allocation area also hit the circuit breaker caps, which I'll talk more about in the next presentation as well. But for here in the TIP area, $29,000 of their taxes are at the cap that they don't collect. So that leaves $60,000 of TIF that the Redevelopment Commission collects on an annual basis from the City of Sullivan. The bottom part of the schedule shows that if you didn't need that $60,000, if you had funded all your projects and you didn't need that, collect that revenue anymore, what would that do to the overall tax needs? So, as I said, if you look at the estimated property tax levy for the county, it's still $7,952,000, because again, the county can't increase that number. What does change is the tax base. Now, the assessed value is not $985 million, but it's $993 million. Which is about a $7 million increase, which is the amount of assessed value that you're capturing in the City of Sullivan, and also the amount of assessed value that you're capturing on the next page, $5.7 million in Hamilton Township. So the county's tax base increases by $7 million. So you have the same budget, $7.9 million, but a higher tax base, so your tax rate decreases. So now your tax rate, instead of being 0.807, for the county, it's 0.8006, so it decreases slightly. And it works the same way for the township, the school corporation. So you can see for all those units, if you look at that, if you were to pass through all the assessed value, the tax rate for the City of Sullivan would decrease from $4.30 to $4.22. And as you can see at the far right, there is one fund that acts a little different. It's the QCAP Development Fund. That's one fund where if the assessed value increases, you do have the ability to increase your revenue, because that rate can stay the same. So since the City of Sullivan has a QCAP Development Fund, you can see that by passing through that assessed value, it can collect an extra $822. So passing through all your assessed value, you're decreasing the tax rate for the City of Sullivan by 8 cents. Turn the page, Hamilton Township by 2 cents, but you're foregoing that $180,000 in revenue that you're currently collecting in TIF from both areas. So from the Redevelopment Commission standpoint, and from the county standpoint, as long as you have projects that need to be funded, it makes more sense, it's more economical, more efficient to capture the assessed value, capture the TIF, and fund these projects, rather than pass through the assessed value, because you're just decreasing tax rates. And if you had to, assuming you still had to fund those projects, if you had to levy a property tax to pay for those projects, because you didn't have additional funds on hand, or the county didn't, from EDIT or the general fund, the tax rate that it would require to make up that $180,000 would be more likely more than the 8 cents reduction that you would see by passing through assessed value. So again, it's more efficient, as long as you have projects, it's more efficient to capture AV and use that. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, well, there's some projects that the commissioners have, they haven't got the money to do them all.
Right.
It's like when they did the street project out there from Automatic out to 54. They used
TIF is just another tool that the county or, you know, any entity, municipality has, city or town, to help fund projects. And again, the goal is to do those road improvements. And to be honest with you, you know, since 2008, when they had the Great Recession, your goal was to maintain the assessed value that you have. That's just as important as to increase the assessed value, especially with agricultural assessed value going down historically. So anything you can do to increase the what you have and increase assessed value, or keep it the same, that's a good thing. Be happy to answer any other questions that you might have. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason.
This is the TIF annual meeting for taxing units.
So you guys have a resolution in front of you. It would be resolution 2021-1. And it's authorizing the issuance of notice pursuant to Indiana Code 36-7-14-39B4. And this redevelopment commission and all redevelopment commissions in Indiana has to have this annual meeting each year and has to have notification to the taxing units before June 15th of each year. And in that, determine the amount of any of the assessed value would need to be passed through. And this resolution shows the figures that Jason just went through. Your last page on page 3, it shows the beginning balance and the use of those funds. The plans are to use the funds for infrastructure improvements and great match. The same for 300 North, the balance on hand was January 1st, 2021 is on this report as well. And the plans to use the funds for infrastructure improvements and great match. That is on the page 3 of your resolution.
Discussion or questions? Motion to pass? I'll make a motion to pass. Julian seconds, in favor? Go, passed and signed as is. One notice to taxing units.
And that is the notice showing that there has been no additional assessed valuation to pass through. And that notice has to be provided to all the taxing units in the county. It needs to be signed by the secretary.
Next agenda is any claims. Oh, make a motion, Jen, sign that. Sorry. Bob makes a motion, all in favor, 1 second, in favor?
Who's second? There is no claim.
Claims. Everything I send?
There
Or at
is-
least for us.
There's one that I just received that I think I'm going to be able to, submit. I will. The question is whether or not the gas capacity will work in Carlisle. I will check that out tomorrow, and, if it works there, I will submit this and send it around to you guys. Unfortunately, it's confidential. I can't discuss it other than say it's Project Runway. You know how we get them very confidentially, no name, no
just so the audience that don't know, we get leads, Jan gets leads for companies that wanna come here, and probably 9 out of 10 of them want a massive sewer, massive water amounts, next to a seaport, next to a major railway. You know, we try to do our best. We've had a couple that we've put the bids in, but most of them, unfortunately, we don't have the infrastructure or the capabilities of handling, which is kind of a shame. And even Terre Haute, Eagle County, they don't have that much better. So just, I know a lot of people say, well, what are we doing? Why isn't the Redevelopment Commission bringing businesses in? Well, we try, it's just most of these businesses want things that we can't handle, the sewer, the water, the railway, the waterway, we just can't handle that kind of stuff. So, we try our best to bring new things in, but most of them, we can't handle the capacity that they require.
For example, this is one we might be able to qualify for, and it needs 275,000 gallons per day sewer. And most of our sewer capacity in this county and most of the towns is at max or close to. Carlisle is upgrading theirs, so I'm gonna try to submit this one for
Other business, Mr. Sandler?
see again.
Do you want to take that? I'll pass it. Yeah, go ahead. Give me one. This is on the solar.
I apologize, I don't have enough for everyone. Dan, if you want to, if you want to say anything before I start, or
The reason we asked Jason to come here and do this meeting tonight on this informational session is a lot of people are not aware of how the levy is maxed out and how that creates a problem with being able to generate new revenue for the county on its operating everyday expenses. So I asked Jason, and Ray and I had a long talk and thought he would be best to do this presentation because this is what they do, this is their expertise. We've asked for him to come down and give an informational session on tax abatement, an informational session about tax increment financing for TIF, and a combination of both, and possibly find a way to generate some new revenue for the county in TIF areas that can be used for infrastructure improvements that the county might not be able to fund otherwise, not having that revenue.
yeah, I'm going to hit, and this meeting is for everyone here, so if you have questions, I want to make sure I try to address them all. I did something very similar to this in Vermilion County, just north of here, a couple months ago. They kind of had a similar question. They're going through, as you probably know as well, a jail project as well, so there's a lot of similarities between the two counties. So I'm taking a lot of these theme schedules that I did for them, and they seemed like it was very helpful. A lot I'm going to be talking about is kind of what we talked about at the end of the Redevelopment Commission meeting about the pass-through, is just kind of how the budgets work, how assessed value, tax rates, circuit breaker are all intertwined. Because I think that's really important to understand, because it kind of shows the importance how offering incentives, whether it's through TIF or tax abatement, how you want to offer those as an incentive, but also be frugal in how you do that. Because you'll see this here in a minute, assessed value that we're talking about. We talked about here, the Redevelopment Commission didn't have any assessed value because the money that they're collecting, it's more efficient to take that money and to pay for projects. But you also do want to increase your tax base, and I'll kind of go through that as well, because that helps all the overlapping tax units, and also does bring in money in a roundabout way to the overlapping units. So I kind of want to try to hit all that, but again, if there's something that you have a question on that I'm not hitting on, feel free to stop me during or after. I want to be able to address that, because this meeting is for everyone here. So just kind of to start out, some of the basics. If you start on page 3, and kind of the first step, we talked about net assessed value. That's determined by the county assessor. The county assessor goes out, in the springtime and assesses what's out there January 1 for the land assessment, the buildings, equipment, and utility equipment. That's all self-assessed by the companies, but it's still filed with the county assessor. And then all the different entities, the county, the school, the townships, the cities, every year, as many of you know, in the summertime, they work on their budget. They work on the amount of expenses that they think they're going to be incurring for the next year. They look at the maximum levy, talk about and figure out, what their cap is, and they submit that to the state. So the county assessor assesses the assessed value, and send that to the state. The different entities prepare their budget and sends that to the state, the Department of Local Government Finance. The Department of Local Government Finance takes that information and certifies the assessed value that the county assessor and county auditor submits, and then they calculate its tax rates and certify the tax rates. So as I kind of mentioned earlier in the previous discussion, you had your budget, $7.9 million, you had your assessed value, and you had your 80-cent tax rate. The state calculates that tax rate based upon the assessed value and the budget that's submitted by the county and the other units. If you turn the page, again, you talk about net assessed value. Net assessed value is the assessed value after any deductions or exemptions. So we'll talk about deductions once we start talking about tax abatements later on. But it's important to know that the net assessed value is, or what's submitted to the state, this tax rates are based upon, is the net assessed value. For instance, all homeowners. If you have a house that's assessed or that sells for $100,000, you're not paying taxes on that $100,000 assessment because there's a homestead deduction, there's self-bill deductions, there's mortgage deductions. So the net assessed value, the assessed value that you're actually paying taxes on, is more like $32,000, not the $100,000, because the $100,000 is the gross. You're paying taxes on the net, so that's important. And the property tax levy, again, that's the amount of taxes that are collected by the entity, and that's applied by the tax rate for $100 of assessed value. So the next page, again, the maximum levy, as we talked about before, that's the maximum amount of tax dollars that each entity can collect. As I mentioned, it's certified by the Department of Local Government Finance. It typically increases each year. It's based upon the 6-year average non-farm personal income. So last year, that increase was about 3.5%. This year, it's 4.1%. For 22, I think we're projecting between 4 and 4.5% increase. But again, that's the same for every county, every entity in the state, and the county or the other entities, whether it's a school or a city, they can't increase their budget payable from property taxes by more than this maximum levy increase. It's called a growth quotient. Page 6, just kind of saying again, it doesn't matter on your population, it doesn't matter if you have an extreme increase in population or property tax values or new development. As I mentioned, it doesn't matter if you have a huge new investment coming into the state. It doesn't matter if that new investment has a ton of requirements, new services it needs to provide. The county or the city can't increase its budget to cover their services. They have to stay within their maximum levy. And again, even additional appropriations, some communities I've found, they get their budget approved by the state at the beginning of the year and then do additional appropriations. You can do as many additional appropriations as you want, as long as you have cash balances, savings to pay for them. Because that's, if you do additional appropriations, that's what you're doing, is you're eating into your cash balances. Because again, you can't spend or you can't collect more than your maximum levy. turn the page. So again, looking at the county's maximum levy is at $7,954,256. The funds that make up the maximum levy, think of the maximum levy as a pie, and you can cut it into different pieces of the pie. And those different pieces of pie are the county's different funds. So the general fund, the reassessment, the Hume Bridge, the health, EMS, and the airport. You can cut those pieces in different sizes that you want, but the total can't be more than the $7,954,000. So as you can see in 2021, the county allocated 6.6 of its maximum levy to the general fund, 171,000 to reassessment, 338,000 to Hume Bridge, 223 to health, 493 to EMS, and then 91,000 to airport. So you can see the county is at its maximum levy, just right under the amount, just for rounding, is the only difference. But again, the county could not increase or levy more than this amount for the state. As I mentioned earlier on the impact statement, there is one fund that's outside the maximum levy that can change based upon the change in assessed value, and that's the Hume Cap Development Fund. And right now, the county does not have a Hume Cap Development Fund. I think there's been discussion about putting one in place, but right now it doesn't have one.
You want to give an example of the advantage of having that, Jason?
Well, it's just more revenue that you can use. The Hume Cap Development Fund is somewhat flexible in what it can be used for. But that was, I haven't calculated. Have we calculated? I think we have. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. That's just additional revenue stream that the county can collect that's outside its maximum levy that can use the fund projects. So
And it's a tax, and it's not locked in, it stays there forever.
correct.
It's 5 years.
I don't think it's that long. I think you can change it.
Okay, I thought there was a max on it, and then it falls off, and then you gotta redo it all over.
No, that you could, it stays on, but as your assessed value increases, the tax rate decreases.
Comes down, yeah.
But there is a cap on what, I think for counties it's 3 cents.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Yeah.
oftentimes, since it changes as your assessed value changes, unless you manually change it, typically it decreases over time because your tax base increases. So typically every 2 or 3 or 4 years, you wanna kind of look at it and see if you can increase that back up to that 3% max. Be the maximum benefit.
And what kind of projects do counties typically fund with that?
Well, it's capital projects, within the county, for like, courthouse, I mean, really any capital project, highway garages, maintenance type issues. I'm seeing a lot of it used more for, I think it can be used for technology. So as general fund balances dwindle away, I'm seeing Hume Cap Development Funds using more for technology, and even I think for payroll for certain employees. So it can be a flexible fund that I would definitely, if you're looking at potentially putting that in place. It is a tax rate increase, so it would be a new additional tax rate that you don't have above right now. That would generate additional revenue the county doesn't currently collect.
If the county was going to do this, what is a timeline that it would for them to put this in place? Like, does it have to be they discuss it, then the resolution, and then does it go to one body to the next body, like council and commissioners, or is it a council?
It has to be done by April, the end of April, so it's too late now to put it in place for 2022. But you could do it in 2023, I think it's commissioners.
Okay.
So, and it has to be, there's a public hearing, so there's a chance for the public to come and voice their opinion if they want.
Jason, I think there's probably still some questions about the Hume Cap.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just really simplify it for everybody? Hume Capital Development Fund, I know we tried to put one in place at one time, and there was a petition against it, and so we just kind of let it die. And
It's just really an additional Yeah, if you turn to page 8, kind of look at it this way. You know, right here, you know, this is all your funds that the county has right now, and the tax rates are on the far right, so if you take the tax rate times the tax base, divide by 100, you get your property tax levy. So if you had the Cume Cap Development Fund, you could have another fund, basically up to 3 cents. So if you kind of look at the, Cume Bridge Fund, it's a little over 3 cents. So if you think if you had a Cume Cap Development Fund, you'd add 3 cents to the tax rate, so instead of being total tax rate of 80 cents for the county, it'd be 83 cents, but you'd collect another $300,000 in revenue that you could use to help fund capital projects throughout the county or help with payroll for IT.
Other than not having the money, is there a serious disadvantage for not having it?
Disadvantage for not having this. I mean,
Any penalties anywhere along the line?
well, we'll talk about for not having it.
Things you can't collect on because you don't have the place?
Yeah, I mean, if your balances are dwindling, and you need money to pay for capital expenditures, Cume Cap is an easy place to generate additional revenue. Because as you know, counties don't have many options. I mean, raising income taxes and raising your Cume Cap development, if you haven't already, those are really going to, and user fees.
And that's a non-reverting fund, it just builds up, correct?
Correct.
But at the time that we tried to implement that, it was because we needed a new roof on the jail and we didn't have any money anyplace else, so we borrowed money from this redevelopment commission in order to put a new roof on the jail. Since then, we've had an increase in our lit funds and we've been able to pay for things like that.
Yeah, it's a matter of need. I mean, if you don't need it, then you don't have to put it in place. You don't have to go all the way to the 3 cents. You can do something less than 3 cents. So again, it's based on needs. Most communities have one, not just counties, but cities and towns have Cume funds. And you saw the city of Sullivan has one. Most have it because of the necessity.
Jason, could we use that for our Cume Bridge if it was in play?
I'd have to look at that.
Because we were told at one time that we were, and I think that's what Bob was alluding to, that we were being penalized because our Cume Bridge was suffering from not having a capital improvements fund. So,
Yeah, it's separate. Your Cume Bridge, it's within your maximum levy, and your Cume Cap development's outside.
right.
So, but I'll look and see if you can spend Cume Cap money on bridges. That I'm not positive.
Do you think the commissioner's got sole say on that?
I'll have to look at that too.
I think he does. I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
I believe it is, Dwayne. I think that was the last problem that we had in trying to pass it. It had been advertised wrong, and so we didn't go ahead with it. Because we tried to give the council permission to do it, but then that didn't work either, so.
Well, there's a fiscal side of it. I know you guys need the money, but I think the council has, when you request it, the council has to approve it, right? Now, I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. I've been wrong before.
I'll follow up.
If you're wrong, you can find me separate
Like in the middle of something here.
Yeah. So you will get back and the community will know who can pass this if it's done. And I do understand, right, that it could be 2 cents, not 3 cents. They decide what they're going to do, but the max is 3.
Correct.
Thank you.
Things you said technology, does that mean, we're in a rural area expanding so we get internet out in the rural area? Is that something they can spend that money on? Is that?
So like broadband?
Yes.
It's more for internal,
IT here.
Yeah.
So it's actually into these IT support, not being able to put in.
Right.
Can you say there was a minimum you have to take if you're gonna do, and can you do it any increments for, can you do it
You can do it in increments. So page 8, I'm just showing to kind of go through just the kind of the detail of the county. You know, you can just kind of see the different tax rates for each fund and how each fund is broken up to receive its maximum levy. And that's how they came up with the 7.9 million. And that's something that the county, you know, based upon needs, you know, between the different funds, you know, that can be adjusted each year based upon the goals and needs of the county. The next kind of topic I want to talk about is the tax caps, circuit breaker credits. The circuit breaker credits, as many of you probably know, basically just credits that limit a person's tax liability. It's based upon their gross assessed value, and it's basically, like I said, a cap on the property tax bill. And those caps or those credits, it's a positive thing to the taxpayer, because if that's a portion of their gross taxes, they don't have to pay. It's a negative to the entities, because that's the portion of the taxes that they levy that you don't collect. And the portion that the taxpayer doesn't pay, and I'll do this calculation here, that's allocated proportionally to all the different units. And the tax caps, as you probably know, for homesteads, they're capped at 1%. Rental property, agricultural property, long-term care facilities, they're capped at 2%. And then commercial and industrial, both real property and equipment are capped at 3%. So example here, you know, $100,000 house, gross assessed value, it's capped at $1,000. Rental property, long-term care, $100,000 is capped at 2%. So rental property or farmland's not going to pay more than $2,000, and the commercial is not going to pay more than 3%, or $3,000. So I kind of wanted to go through a scenario on exactly how this works, because I know the circuit breaker, it gets complicated, and I get asked the question a lot. So I use the city of Sullivan as an example. So on page 12, I did the same thing for the city of Sullivan taxing district as I kind of did for Redevelopment Commission. So you can see the city of Sullivan taxing district. It's made up of the Sullivan County taxing unit, township, the city, the school, and the public library. So the total tax rate for the city of Sullivan district is $4.30 based upon these different units. So if you turn the page, if you take a house that has an assessed value or a gross assessed value of $100,000, after you take all the deductions, the mortgage, homestead, and supplemental, its net assessed value is $32,750. So again, that's what they pay taxes on. So if you take that $4.30 tax rate times that $32,750 of assessed value, that taxpayer gross assessed taxes is $1,410. But you have to take the cap into consideration. So again, homesteads are capped at 1%. So 1% of $100,000 is $1,000. So that taxpayer is not going to pay more than $1,000. So he receives a credit, he or she receives a credit of $410. So again, positive for the taxpayer. They don't pay more than $1,000. The problem is when the county, when the city, when the school, when the library, the township, when they all did their budget, they were kind of counting on that $1,410. So they have to show a loss of $410. And that loss, as I said, is allocated proportionally. So if you turn the page, looking at, again, that $4.30. So Sullivan County is 80 cents the unit. So it makes up 18.7% of the total tax rate. So of that $410 credit, the county gets 77%. That's their portion of the loss. As you can see, the biggest losers is the city and the school. The city loses almost half of it, $203, and then the school loses almost 27%, or $109. So of that $410 credit, you kind of see that as a loss of $77 to the county, you know, $4 to the township, $200 of the loss goes to the city, $4 to the CCD fund, $109 to the school, and $13 to the school corporation. So if you look at the next page, you know, that's just one taxpayer. You know, that can really add up if you look at all the taxpayers in the county. So what I did was for the county unit, you can see, again, the county budgeted, or they levied $7,953,000. But they lost $462,000 due to circuit breaker credits. So those credits that all the taxpayers in the county received. So in reality, assuming everyone in the county, you know, 100% collection rate, the county's only going to receive $7,491,000, or about 98%. So they lose about 2% of their levy because of circuit breaker. Any questions with that so far? And then I just put this schedule together. I usually do because it kind of tells a story, and this is typical not just for the county, but probably every entity that's here. In the county, it's the same trend, and it's probably even more severe for the schools in the city. But you can see how the circuit breaker losses have increased over the years. So in 2016, the county circuit breaker losses were 147,000. Really didn't change too much in 17 and 18. 19 they increased a little bit more in 2020, and in 2021, you can see they almost doubled. So again, it's probably the same thing for the school and the other entities in the county. Again, that's just lost revenue that you were counting on, they're not receiving because of the caps.
Do you see the legislature doing anything about this in the future at the rate this is increasing? I mean, how long can the schools and the towns and the county, even the county?
Well, what they did was, and my last two schedules talk about this, you know, when they did this in 2008, you know what, the whole caps became a hot topic, I think in 2007, 2008, when they had that major reassessment. And there were certain parts of the state, mostly around Indianapolis on Meridian Street, where the assessed values just jumped dramatically. And it was probably where those houses were under-assessed tremendously for years, and then they probably just got assessed where they really shouldn't be. But they were, I mean, we heard stories where it was like a 3,000, 4,000% increase, you know, more than what, you know, a person typically take in 1 year. So that's why the caps became popular politically. So they had these caps, and they knew that there'd be these circuit breaker losses. They knew right out the year one, people would be hitting those caps, and there'd be a loss in revenue to the communities. So that's when they increased your flexibility on the local income taxes. They created a couple of new income taxes and increased the maximums that counties could adopt. So that was what the legislation gave you to help offset some of these losses in property taxes, which gave you the flexibility to increase income taxes. Now you've kind of had the perfect storm, especially back in 2008, because you had the Great Recession, so you had assessed values decreasing, which we just showed. When you have a assessed value decreasing, the tax rate goes up and your circuit breaker increases. The other thing that has hurt, especially rural counties such as yourself, is the decrease in farmland values. Because I looked at the reason your circuit breaker increased so much from 2020 to 2021 is your assessed value countywide decreased 3%. A lot of it has to do with the decrease in farmland. We're projecting that farmland, I think, is going to start, it's hopefully hit bottom. We'll hit bottom very soon, and we'll start seeing it start to trick back up as far as assessed value in farming, which is going to help your tax base. That's because the farm income has been pretty healthy the last couple of years, so that should start driving up the assessed value for farmland, which will help with circuit breakers somewhat. But to answer your question, this legislature will tell you that the tool they gave you to help offset circuit breaker is your flexibility in the income tax.
That's a short-term thing.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, and this is kind of what we're getting back to, the reason for tax increment and tax abatement is, and we'll talk about, the goal is to increase your assessed value. So you want to try to provide incentives to get those companies to locate here, so that does increase your tax base and keep tax rates low. and reduce circuit breaker losses. But it's not something, as you know, happens overnight. It's a process. And that kind of just goes into my next couple of schedules. Exactly, the tax increment, we talk about, it's a tool which captures the assessed value and real property and sometimes personal property over a certain period of time. Typically just captures commercial industrial property. Turn to page 18. Again, the reason you capture the personal property we talked about earlier is to provide incentives or fund infrastructure that's going to encourage economic growth. And while that assessed value is being captured, the overlapping tax units is just foregoing that new assessed value during that time period. And as we talked about, once the TIP area ends or your projects are all funded, then all that new assessed value gets added to the tax base. But until that time, all the overlapping tax units are foregoing that new assessed value until that time period. But again, I look at TIF as an investment. Just exactly what you're doing. You guys are using your TIF, taking it, and putting it right back into the area, building up the infrastructure to support additional growth and additional assessed value. And that's the whole point of TIF, is to provide the infrastructure, provide incentives to increase the assessed value and also, create jobs. Going back to that income, not the property income, but the income taxes. That's where more and more counties are kind of getting dependent upon income taxes because of the assessed value going down and because of the flexibility the state's given counties increase their property or income taxes. They've done that. So the goal of TIF and tax abatement is to increase your assessed value and encourage job growth in the county. And as far as tax abatements in the page, it's a phasing in of net assessed value in property taxes. It reduces companies' liability, operating expenses. Sometimes new companies are either looking at starting up or trying to expand, and they're trying to reduce their operating costs. They'll often ask for tax abatement as an incentive. Keeping in mind that assessed value is very important. I don't know what the procedures are here, but I wouldn't recommend giving a tax abatement to everyone who comes and asks for it. Tax abatement is an incentive for those people, those companies who need it to help them get started, make expansions, and start their companies and make the new investment. But I try to be frugal with the abatements that you give because you want that assessed value added to your tax base as soon as you can. I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments on.
Well, like the solar farms that we're all looking at, who sets the assessed value of that?
For utility property, the companies file their assessments with the state, so they kind of set it. It's based upon their costs, so they can depreciate it however they want to, but just like for manufacturing equipment, there's a 30% floor. So their assessed value that they pay taxes on can't fall below 30% of the cost. So they can depreciate it as quickly or slowly as they want to, but once it hits that 30% floor, they can't fall below that.
The thing on the tax abatements is we have to wait for the tax abatement to end. We're losing revenue, and we're not creating a lot of jobs.
For solar, you're talking about?
Yes,
Solar.
yes.
Yeah, and for solar, if you kind of go to the next page, you're right for tax abatement, just not for solar, but for all investment, it is a phasing in.
Yeah.
So it does take time. So this is what I tried to show on page 20 is, the first year, this is kind of a traditional 10-year tax abatement. The first year, it's often 100% abatement. So the net assessed value, the gross assessed value is $100,000, but you paid $100,000, so the net's zero, so they pay zero taxes. In the second year, again, the assessed value doesn't change, the gross is still $100,000, but then you only abate 95% of it, so they pay taxes on 5%. And then by year 11, they're paying taxes on 100%. So it's a phasing in of that assessed value or taxes that they pay. So that is correct, but they do pay, typically they do pay some taxes, it's just a gradual increase over time.
Now, you say that this is a traditional 10-year. Does it have to be 10-year? Can it be a 5-year? Can it be a 3-year? Does it always have to be 0 the first year?
No, and I say traditional, and that's because for a number of years, there were certain percentages that you had to follow. But a couple of years ago, the legislators made that more flexible. So no, it can be any percentage for any number of years that you went up to 20 years. For personal, 10 years for real. So, I mean, we've had some communities be very aggressive and give 100% for 10 years. I wouldn't recommend that, but you have that flexibility. For equipment, because it depreciates so quickly at that 30%, and then oftentimes, you know, it gets old and they replace it, I wouldn't recommend giving a 10-year abatement on personal property, just because it doesn't last that long. So that's something that you might want to give 3 or 5 years.
Is that all to the company itself, not to the landowners?
I'm sorry?
That added tax, is that all to the utility companies or solar companies?
Yes.
Or is that added to property tax on yourself, the landowner?
Well, the abatements can't be applied to real property. For land. Abatements are only for utility, for the equipment or the utility property, or if there's any, you know, substations or, you know, little buildings that they might have, the abatement can be applied for that. But it's a good point for land, you can't get an abatement on. Now for the solar, and I haven't been in any discussions, but I will tell you that I'm working on most of the solar farm and wind farms throughout the state, and working on probably anywhere from 6 to 10 right now. Most of the solar farm companies have an agreement with landowners that if their assessed value increases because of the change in classification of land from ag to the new amount, they'll pay that difference. Now, I don't know if that's what's been discussed here, but
That's what we were told last week.
that's what I've heard for most wind farms and solar farms throughout the state. So that's something that, as a landowner, I definitely look into, because the land assessed value will change once that development is installed. So the next couple of pages I want to show, because you kind of made a comment where once the abatement rolls off, you know, you'll get more taxes. Well, keep in mind, all the entities are at their maximum levy, so you're not going to get more taxes. Kind of think about it as a bucket of money. You know, say $1,000. The most that you can collect is $1,000. So if you have a new company come in and start paying taxes, that just means everyone else pays a little bit less, but you're still not going to collect more than $1,000. So that's what I've tried to kind of show here in these schedules. Same thing if assessed value decreases. If you have a large company or any company that moves out of the county or moves equipment out, again, they're going to pay less taxes, but you still need that $1,000 to fund your budget. So that means everyone else in the county has to pay a little bit more. So again, so if assessed value decreases, your tax rate increases, so everyone pays a little bit more. If you have new investment coming in the county and your assessed value increases, then your tax rate decreases, because everyone else pays a little bit less, because now you have a new person at the party to help pay it. And again, this is assuming that you're at your maximum levy, which just about everyone is. So, for instance, on page 22, if you have a maximum budget of $2 million, a tax base of $500 million, you need a 40-cent tax rate to fund that $2 million budget. If you have a company come in and invest $50 million, your tax base increases to $550 million. Again, you still can't increase your budget. It's still capped at that $2 million, but now you only need a 36-cent tax rate to fund that sum budget. The only fund that's different is the CUME fund, which is again why you might want to consider adopting the CUME fund. Again, and this one's 0.0331, 500 million, you could generate $165,000. So again, if the tax base increases for the CUME capital development rate, you can keep that the same. It doesn't have to decrease. They would generate now $182,000. So you collect an extra $16,000 from that new $50 million investment. So let's see how all that would look at for the city of Sullivan, and really all over that in tax units. So if you kind of go back to my example of the city of Sullivan, again, the tax rate, based upon today's rates, are $4.30. And I just assumed, say a company comes in and invests $20 million of investment. Again, the tax rates or the property tax levies don't change, but your tax base increases. So for the county, it goes from $985 million to $1,005 million. The township from $208 million to $228. The school, $631 to $651 million. So you see the tax rate, by $20 million of new assessed value, the tax rate would go down about 51 cents. So $4.30 to $3.79. But as you can see there on the far right, no one really received any new revenue except for the city and the Cume Fund, and they only get an extra $7,000. So does that make sense? I know it's not very intuitive. But again, so as you're adding new assessed value, this reduces tax rates. So everyone else pays a little bit less. So looking back at that same homeowner with $100,000, again, their net assessed value is $32,750. Now with the lower tax rate, now their gross tax bill is $1,241. Again,
Question here.
yeah.
Does the city of Sullivan give out of the county's money, or is the city of Sullivan?
When you say get their money, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well,
They have an additional tax. Sullivan has higher taxes than Hamilton Township
Right.
inside the city.
I might answer your question for the next couple of slides. So for this slide, that same homeowner, again, their gross taxes are $1,241, but still, they're not going to pay more than $1,000. So now they're going to receive a credit of $241 instead of the $400 that they were getting before. But again, they're not paying more than $1,000. So really, for this homeowner, they're not really going to see any impact. They're still paying $1,000. But who sees the benefit is the overlapping tax units, because now instead of losing, $400 because of circuit breaker, they're only losing $241. So I've allocated that $241 of circuit breaker loss credit to the taxpayer, but a loss to the units. So now the county loses $50, the township loses $2, the city loses 107 plus 3, the school loses 70, and the library loses 9. So if you turn to page 27, I kind of compared, what each unit would have lost under today's version versus if there was an extra $20 million of assessed value to the tax base. So you can see, for instance, the county, by the 50 cents decrease in tax rate for the city of Sullivan, their losses are $27 less for this taxpayer. For the city, their losses is $97 less. So that's kind of where they pick up a little bit additional revenue in a roundabout way, because their losses are less by the decrease in tax rate. So that's where it's important that you want to increase your tax base, so you decrease your tax rate and decrease your circuit breaker losses. So that's where, we talked about the solar farm and tax abatements. That's where it's going to help the community, is you're not going to get, unless we start talking about economic development payments, which is why it's very important, why we negotiate and we encourage counties to ask for economic development payments, because as you see here, it doesn't matter if you're going to be adding, $400 or $500 million of assessed value to your county. You're not going to generate a lot of revenue, but you can't do those economic development payments. As the tax abatements do roll off, that is going to reduce your tax rates and reduce your circuit breaker losses. And they can be material, but it's going to take time.
Are you going to cover the economic development things later on, or do I need to ask that question now?
I don't have that covered, but we can talk about it.
You want to explain that a little bit, because a lot of people don't understand
Sure.
all that. I kind of get a grasp of it, and you end up understanding it.
Well, the economic development payments, we do this for solar farms. They've been around for a long time, and now it's typical for all, wind farms. It's typical for solar farms as well. As you know, for these wind farms and solar farms, they take a lot of ground. And there's an opportunity cost there because that's ground that the county could have used for other economic development that would have provided, jobs to the community. Because you're right, solar farms, wind farms do not provide a lot of jobs. So when you're giving tax abatements, you typically give tax abatements for manufacturing companies that do provide jobs that are going to bring in income taxes. But with these large wind and solar farms, there's an opportunity cost because they're taking all this land out of use for 25, 30, 50 years. So we generate, they should pay for that because that's, again, a loss for the community. So we came up with this economic development payment that these developers would pay for the use of that land for that period of time. And it's a way that the community can get upfront revenue to help pay for future economic development ventures. And we, with legal counsel, structure it to allow that revenue to be pretty flexible for the community. So again, as we kind of talked about, even if they're adding assessed value, whether it's abated or not, the community's not getting a lot of revenue, if any at all. So the economic development payment is a way for the county to get immediate benefit from cash up front, while at the same time increasing their assessed value as those abatements roll off. And then over time, that's going to decrease tax rates and decrease your circuit breaker losses.
Is there a correlation between abatements and economic development payments? If you don't get abatements, you get economic development payments, or vice versa?
There's really no correlation, but typically most developers ask for tax abatements, and we encourage all counties to ask for economic development payments.
Okay.
So there's no real correlation, but they both tend to happen together. And we kind of, sometimes the communities or developers will ask for more tax abatements. So counties will say, well, we'll allow that, but we want more economic development payments. So there's negotiations there.
Is there a cap on your economic development ask?
Yeah.
And that money comes directly from the company.
Yeah, it comes directly from the company to the county.
Will that be set up on annually, semi-annually, monthly? or
It's
is
all
that
negotiable. It's all negotiable. It's usually on an annual basis. It's usually the first year there's dirt moved, the platform is done, and then it can be here every year after that on its anniversary.
So that money that goes to the economic development, do they have the say where that money is spent? Does it go to the area that's getting the solar, or does it go to the whole county?
It goes to the county.
Does the council have any say where how it's
That's
spent,
all determined
or is that
locally.
commissioners?
That's determined locally who
Okay.
decides that. I've seen it different in different counties.
Okay,
But no, the company doesn't have any say.
right.
Next question out there.
Well, she kind of asked the question, we're hearing of 1,800 acres here, the solar farm, 1,800 or 2,000 here, 600 over this way. So Jackie kind of asked my question. That money, so say over my district, we've got 600 acres, it's gonna be the solar farm. That 600, that revenue off that, will that go, will we split that southwest just like they will their property? Is it overall? Or will it be locked in a district?
No, it's not locked in. It'll just go into, and depending on how the county sets it up, it could go into a solar farm fund that it creates. And if you have 3 companies, all 3, and they all have economic development payments, all pay those payments to go into that one fund, and then it can be used on however the county decides, wherever the county decides. You could have 3 separate funds, one for each company if you wanted to, but either way, the county, council commissioners, however it's written up, decides where that money can be used.
But that money is above property tax.
Yes, it's out, and
That's what
why,
they need to understand.
that's why
That's a way of getting money above that cap.
right, and that's why we don't tie it to tax abatements. because we wanna make sure that it's outside the general fund, outside the maximum levy, doesn't, impact that, and it can be used for anything.
The only way we, like Nick's asking about that 600 acres over, if that's put into the TIF district right over there.
It is not yet.
It is not yet, but that's the only way, if we got that money in the TIF district over there, it can be used for reconstruction.
No, we can talk about, I was gonna talk about that, but another thing you could do, is, and again, it doesn't have to be solar, it could be any new development, but for solar, you could, instead of having the assessed value be added to the tax base to reduce tax rates, to reduce circuit breaker by, pennies, you could create it into a TIF area and then capture 100% of the redevelopment commission, just like what we talked about earlier, and then all that TIF would have to be used for capital projects that are in serving or benefiting that area. And that, whether you put a TIF area or not, the company doesn't have any say in that either. I mean, that's totally up to the municipality where the development is located.
And it doesn't affect the company either, correct?
Correct. So that's another way, just like we talked about the redevelopment commission, if you have capital projects, that is the most efficient way to fund projects. But then all the overlapping taxing is foregoing that new assessed value until your projects are done. So that's the drawback of creating a TIF, is that the school, the township, and the county doesn't see that increase in tax base until the TIF area ends. It doesn't see the decrease in tax rates or the decrease in circuit breaker losses. And you don't have to capture 100%. I mean, you could do where you capture a portion of the TIF and fund your project and then pass through the rest of it, just like the Redevelopment Commission did tonight, determined they didn't have any excess in the solar farm project. If you wanted to TIF it, they could every year say, hey, we want to pass through 50% or whatever percentage. So the other lasting taxing do see some immediate benefit.
And that was one thing I had talked to the school superintendents about, is you had said you could pass through up to 50% to the school corporations, is that correct?
I think the 15%, there is legislation that allows redevelopment commissions to, first of all, for TIF areas, you pass through assessed value. What you can't do, except for this one exception, you just can't say, we're gonna capture 100% of TIF and then write a check to the township and say, hey, here's your money, or to the city, or to the library. Except schools. You can do that for schools, up to 15% of what you collect annually. And then there's limitations on what you can use that money for, but they're pretty broad.
You saying 5-0 or 1-5?
1-5, 15%.
There's limitations of what the school could do with that 15%, or limitations of what the other 85% can go to. You're saying we could.
What the school, but I mean, I've seen, for instance, one redevelopment commission I'm working for, they give, I don't think it's up to 15%, it's something, but the school uses that money to help buy iPads, computers for all their students. Once they helped build a lab, a science lab, like for agricultural, because they're big in agriculture, so they spent, a few $100,000 one year to, improve this room and, put in equipment for that. So it's anything that's gonna encourage, education, workforce, you can use it for.
You said you worked with Vermilion County on some of their solar, what they've got going on there. What kind of economic money was given from solar companies to the redevelopment area? I mean, can you elaborate?
For Vermilion, I did basically the same presentation for them, and I'm working with them on their jail as well. I am working with them on their solar projects. It's very preliminary. There haven't been discussions on that yet.
Okay.
Either. But as far as your question,
I mean, just roughly, looking at other counties, I mean, are we looking in $1 million, $2 million? I mean, what kind of money?
Yeah,
easily from these solar companies paying into? Okay.
Easily in the millions. Over
Okay.
2, 3, 4 years.
Okay.
I mean, there's one county that I'm working with that they need cash. So the company, this is actually one company who didn't ask for tax abatement, one of the few that I've seen, but the county needs cash. So they're saying, hey, we'll give you tax abatement if you give us economic development payment for 20 years. That's the extreme. But
Right.
it kind of shows you where you can be. So,
Right. Okay.
And I've seen, Randolph County's one that I've done, they have wind and solar, and the first, company, they just did traditional tax abatement like I was showing here, and got economic development payments, a couple $1 million over a 3 or 4 year period. The next one came by, they needed more cash, so they said, hey, we'll give you 100% tax abatement, but you give us, equivalent of what you would have paid in taxes for the next 10 years.
Okay. So looking at what we're looking at the future with solar and losing Hoosier Energy, is this solar, do you think, is going to be the answer to make up for the loss that we're losing in taxes with Hoosier Energy?
It will definitely help, and that's something I think, as you're looking at economic development payments and TIF, because, and I have here example of what losing Hoosier Energy, because that's like 20% of your tax base.
Right.
$200 million of assessed value.
Not to mention the loss of income taxes for the jobs, for all the other taxes.
Yeah.
we got
Right.
on the income.
So I haven't even, and I've got these schedules here to kind of show,
Okay.
it's a huge impact, losing that, so.
Because there's a 2-year, from Hoosier Energy leaving at 2023 and the new company coming in, solar, there's a 2-year gap. So the 2-year gap is what's got me concerned. Are these abatements going to fall off in time
And that's
to make up
something-
the difference?
That's something I think we'll definitely want to look at, as you're looking at, economic development payments, TIF, how that's going to impact really all the overlapping taxes, because like I said, it's a huge impact. And then you get the economic development payments will help pay for that. There are some counties that I've worked with that have taken their economic development payments and have shared that with some of the other units, so that's a possibility as well.
So have any of these negotiations or talks taken place with any of the committees or anybody with these solar companies? Because I know we've already drove stakes in fields and we're already collecting federal dollars because we've already got projects started.
They haven't contacted you guys at all, set up a meeting. It goes through the redevelopment first, and then it comes to the council.
There have been committee meetings, but not any public meetings yet.
Okay. So the only negotiations they've had so far is with the
There's no
potential
negotiations,
landowners.
they just told us.
Because they've already drove stakes.
So the meeting that you had at the Elks was just an informational meeting for your people, which should have been a public informational meeting, really. The public needs to know what's happening. Well,
Those will happen.
it should have been, it's just behind closed doors. It should have been an open
Well,
meeting.
you had one with them, Beth. Did you not? At the Elks?
I was not at the Elks.
Oh, I've literally, since you was, I apologize. I apologize.
Typically, companies don't wanna have a public meeting first thing. They wanna know how the county boards are set up, what is the procedure for the steps of public meetings, whether or not the county would be even open to negotiation for any kind of abatement or any kind of tip or whatever incentives are out there. And they don't typically want to have that first meeting be a public meeting and have it out in the media. They would like to talk to people confidentially first. So rather than it just be this board, we had one of the county commissioners, 3 county councilmen, 2 people from this board, so it wasn't a forum to sit down and talk with them and see what they thought they needed to know from the county side and what we thought we could collect to come back to a public meeting once those meetings started, and would be a little more informed to ask the right questions, and also to talk with Jason so he can do these kind of informational packets so people know what's being said.
Right.
Nothing was negotiated behind the scenes that anyone would ever have to worry about. We're not out asking favors from anyone behind the scenes. That is not something any county official that's elected or appointed would ever do.
Now, just from my experience, typically there's multiple meetings for negotiations because they're gonna ask for the most, and then we're gonna ask for the most, and then there's usually some back and forth on that. So usually what I've seen is it doesn't really go to a public meeting until both sides have kind of come to an agreement, and then you present it to the public, because there's a lot of back and forth before both sides agree, because we want to get the best for the county, and of course they're going to want the best for them, and our goals are different, so it's going to take. I've been in meetings before where the company, we gave them our proposal and they walked out.
I think one of the things with the community is that the citizens of the community would like to know, what are these solar farms gonna be like? What are we talking about in acreage? Where are they gonna be located? And there should be, I think this is what the community wants to know. We don't wanna know about the negotiations that are going on because we've elected commissioners, council to take care of that. We have boards to do that. But we'd like to know, what are these companies wanting to do to our county?
Yeah, and typically, and they want to do that because they want it to be a streamlined process. They don't want to upset, any of the citizens either. So what I've typically seen, I haven't talked to any of these companies directly, but usually they ask to come to a public meeting where they can present all that information.
And I know at least one of the solar companies was planning to do that last spring, and then we all know what happened last spring. It stopped all public meetings. They wanted to have an informational meeting, and they still plan to do that soon. And they will have large maps printed out and show the public that wants to attend exactly where they plan to put solar farms. And hopefully those will happen soon, especially one company that we're working with is based out of Chicago, Illinois. And if you've watched the news this week, you saw Illinois just opened up. So they are able to now travel more. They will be here soon to do an informational meeting.
And I encourage you to ask them, ask them about the technology, ask them about, what they're gonna put in between their, panels, what kind of buffer they're gonna have. That's your opportunity to ask those questions. They should be prepared to answer those.
And I'm gonna say this is a public relations thing, and I understand we had COVID, but schools had to function, boards had to function. There is the internet, there are Zoom meetings, there are meetings that they could have done some education along the way. And I understand COVID was terrible for everyone, but the world didn't stop.
We've invited them to multiple meetings. We're ready for them to come and tell us what they want to do. We can't make them.
I know.
But I told them that they want to just have a meeting in that certain area. But I told them at the Elks the other day that they need, Fairbanks, Carlisle, because it's just that it may be going in Fairbanks Township, but it just does not affect, it affects the whole county. And they kind of balked on that, but I think they come around a little bit, didn't they?
I think they would like to have a meeting in the Fairbanks area because that's gonna be the most impactful for the people that are surrounded by that. But I think they also intend to have one at our 4-H fairgrounds where everyone throughout the county can come and attend.
And I understand all of this. It's just that if you tell people what's happening, there's going to be less of talk of what could happen, etc. And that's like I encourage the commissioners, the council, this committee to be open in everything you do, because when you are closed, it appears something's going on you don't want the citizens to know.
We've been very careful to not have a quorum. We have met in public restaurants where people.
I'm not talking about quorums, I'm just let the people know what's happening.
Deanne,
Yeah.
if I may, it's just like labor contract negotiations. I could never tell my members until I signed that
I know.
what was happening. And if we let people every night come out to the meeting, it's back and forth, and I don't know nothing till
Right.
we get it settled.
I know.
And that's really where they're at.
Part of it's also on the companies we deal with, they don't want
They don't want
to
to.
do.
They don't want to
They
take
want to
away.
make sure, like he said, it's back and forth.
It's not just solar.
It's not just solar farms, it's everything. We've talked to other businesses, not only
I
solar
know,
farms.
I know.
They don't want to get the public out. It's not just us.
For a good example, Brampton Brick, before they came here, I hate to guess how many meetings we were in. Dwayne, Ray, myself, 17 months, we worked with them
I understand.
trying to negotiate to get them into Sullivan County, Indiana, because we were fighting to get them here with 3 other states that was also trying to get them here. And we were lucky enough that the first United States plan was in Sullivan County. But that, we couldn't tell anybody what we were doing. John Waterman was in some of those meetings because he was a state senator at that time. But we couldn't talk about what we were doing, but we had to meet and negotiate and say, you know, we would like to have you here, what can we do to, they took trainloads of clay from Sullivan County and shipped it to Ontario, Canada, to make sure it would make good brick. So a lot of people knew what they were doing, but we just couldn't talk about it. I mean, we had to keep our mouth shut.
When negotiations starts, with the county, we so long, on all these negotiations.
I think so.
The reason I'm saying that we've got attorneys, but when it comes down to, listen, we can't change anything with an abatement, we can't not abate them and get any more money to the county. We need to definitely, make sure that we get all we got to come to this economic development, and I don't know anybody here that knows how to set that.
Yeah, no, I think
Some of the leagues behind, they're gonna be here 50 years.
Yeah, I'm believe that I'll be at these meetings and I'll be representing the county and, you know, showing the potential impact from the state taxpayer perspective and also, you know, negotiating on your behalf to get the best deal. And that's what, you know, us and, you know, Rick Hall, the legal counsel, like I said, we've done this, a lot of times, so we know, you know, we can say what's public anyway, what other counties are receiving, and, you know, make sure that Sullivan County, you know, gets what they should deserve as well.
Is there some kind of guideline? I mean, what these other counties have done with the solar and everything, that you could give us?
Yeah, we have the
So we
last.
have no idea
Yeah.
what to ask.
I can tell you it's all over the place. I wish
Yeah.
it was as simple as a formula. It's not, because it's, again, it's negotiations and, there's a lot of things that go into it. But yeah, I have, and we take that into consideration. And they know it as well because, they have the representation and, you know, they'll come back and says, well, you know, especially the wind, you know, where we pay less economic development payments because the wind isn't as strong here, or the tax rate's higher here, you know, so they'll come back with their counter offers and we'll come back with ours.
Is it ever part of the negotiations to, because there aren't really many jobs, meaning not much income tax to be gathered, that the negotiations include using local businesses to do some of the work in the construction of the solar field?
That's often discussed. A lot of times, say if there's you know, any of the labor that's involved with installing the panels, I mean, yeah, yes, anything, whether it's purchasing or any materials that can be purchased in the county, they always encourage that they, you know, use local businesses.
And that was discussed in one of the meetings that I sat in on, that they would use local and they would use union, was in the one I was in.
And that's one thing I will street commissioners speak back to. We're pretty adamant about that. We want to try to use as much local as they can.
And what kind of process does that usually look like for putting it out there for local businesses to have the opportunity to bid for it, or to have first dibs on it, or whatever?
That's where I'm not sure. I haven't really been in that ball on that side of things, but I would just encourage that, you know, when you talk to these companies, that, I mean, you know, the companies that provide those types of services, you give them those list of companies and people, have them reach out to them.
I'd just like to add, you know, this is not the first go-around we've had with solar in the county. I mean, we sure learned a little bit from the last one. A lot of what you said as far as the depreciation outrunning the tax abatement was exactly what I stated in the last time we was having these meetings before we gave the tax abatement. And the local labor and all that, these solar companies already got that stuff all planned out before they come here, just like they came here before they came to you people. And they're already driving stakes in the ground and approaching the farmers and the landowners. They put the cart before the horse, and we're gonna be playing catch up again, is what's gonna happen. Now, I know you weren't involved with the last one. I don't know why you weren't or when you came into the picture, but I like a lot of what you're saying as far as
And I will say that, they will probably say that, you know, some of the, whether it's material or expertise, they may not have, you may not have it here in this county, so that's something that you'll have to, you know, call them on it. Maybe you do, maybe you don't.
I mean, their equipment, they can set it up on any kind of depreciation schedule they prefer.
Yeah.
That's totally their choice on the
Yeah,
tax.
and that we don't have
They can
any.
depreciate it all out in 3 to 5 years if they choose to. And we're sitting there going, hey, wait a minute, we're gonna try to recoup this money, but it's not worth it.
And one other thing that we will put in the
The floor
documents.
is 30%.
Huh?
The floor is 30%.
Yeah, as long as it can't fall below 30%. But one thing that we will put in the documents, if you go forward, that is if the law ever changes, because, you know, legislation changes all the time. It always talks about eliminating personal property taxes or utility taxes. We'll put in the documents where if the law does change, they'll have to make a pilot payment. So they'll make a payment that if they did have to pay property taxes, this is what they pay, and this is what they owe the county. So we always put that in all of the legal documents to protect the county in case the law changes and they become exempt. So that's something that I don't know if the other deal had that or not, but that's something that is in every document that we review.
You know, what we're getting ready to get faced with, like Jackie said, we're getting ready to lose all the revenue from Hoosier Energy, which in turn is gonna lose the revenue from the coal mines. This county's looking at drastic measures here in the next 3 years. It's gonna get ugly. And if we can offset with this and get these guys to pay a whole bunch of money, that's an avenue, but we gotta get that all squared away.
That's right.
Tax abatement's what they need, but we can catch it on the other end.
Right.
We just need a win-win for Sullivan County, that's all.
I think, and we need to look at all the units as well. They all will be impacted, so I think it's, it may be a combination of tax abatement, economic development payments, and since your situation is, we may need to get a little creative. And like I said, some of those counties maybe give a little bit more here, so we can get a little bit more somewhere else.
I was just wondering, because we're basically all new at this, now these solar places are gonna cut 1,200 acres or whatever. Do they have to have a bond, and are they required to give the county an insurance policy? So if there's a big hailstorm, they go belly up, there's still money to get rid of.
There will be a decommissioning agreement where we kind of get more of the legal sides. I don't want to play the attorney, but there will be a decommissioning agreement that if, you know, for some reason that the keep saying turbines, but the panels are not operational, that they have to come in and fix them, or that there's a bond that the other company will do it. So it protects the county that there's not, you know, some eyesore not being used and efficient and not paying taxes.
And I think also in those abatements, we got to do the setbacks, the buffers, you know, make sure that they're all.
Jason, if you're talking about a bond, I prefer to see the county hold the bond. Can't we pay the county if it's purchased a bond?
That's something we can negotiate and ask for.
Well, yeah, that's why I'm talking to Ray and everybody that's on the commission and the council.
I know, and that's something I've seen here recently, because I've been on a lot of calls. I've heard some companies push back that they don't need to do a bond, that they wouldn't let them sit idle. But I know with Rick Hall, he's pushed back and said, no, we're going to require a bond.
So, trust me.
Yeah.
Well, I think I read somewhere, maybe something Jackie had or something, where they didn't want to pay that bond until the 17th year.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, a lot can happen in that first 17. You know, something needs to be done up front.
And I think with them abatements, that's where we'll set all of our rules and regulations for them coming into the county, because we don't have zoning. So we have to do something. Hold them accountable.
Yeah. That's where that's where your leverage is.
Yeah.
Is with the tax abatement, is if you're not gonna grant a tax abatement, if they don't do, you know, what you recommend or require.
Right.
Now, when time comes for them to ask for a tax abatement, will we know what their assessed value would be at that time? Or
I mean,
we got something to figure off of it.
Yeah.
To show in the dark?
They, They will give us what their investment is. Some companies have their own representation that kind of calculates what they think their property taxes will be, and they'll provide that to me, and then I'll verify it and, really make sure it's correct. And even if they don't, then they'll tell me what they're investing, and then, you know, I'll run numbers and I'll have them, you know, make sure they think it's reasonable. But yeah, we'll have an idea of what they're gonna pay in property taxes and how much they'll save in tax abatement. I'll be able to do these calculations to show this is how much your tax rate will decrease once the abatement rolls off. If we do TIF, I'll be able to calculate that and show if you do 50%, 25%. I can run all those figures for you, so you can make sure that, you know, whatever we negotiate, it's what's best for the county. Because they may do traditional, or, and we may want to do something different because of our needs here.
Jason, I see on one of your next slides that you're assuming that Hoosier's gonna take away quite a bit there.
Yeah, so, you know,
Does that include the basic value of the farm ground that they still own? I mean, because they're set by the state right now.
yeah, the farm, I think this is just, this is probably an extreme, because this is assuming all the assessed value, is removed, the equipment, which the majority of their, investment is the equipment. I think like 180 million to 200 million is the equipment, but this is kind of, assumes all the buildings, all the assessed value is gone. So this is on page 28 on Guild Township. And the current tax rate's $2.15. I didn't have the detail to know exactly what makes up the $201 million, but Hoosier Energy's assessed value is 201, so I just kind of assumed that all went away. And you can see the tax rate jumps up, you know, 87 cents to $3. So then on the next page, I showed a taxpayer, you know, a residential taxpayer with a $100,000 house. They're not at the tax cap, so their tax bill right now is $704 a year. With Hoosier Energy there, without Hoosier Energy, their tax bill goes up to $988 a year. For the city of Sullivan, again, it's not located in the city of Sullivan, but it impacts the county's tax base, the school's tax base, which impacts the city of Sullivan's tax rate. So you see the city of Sullivan's tax rate on page 30. Their tax bill, which is $4.30 right now, would go up to $5.08. So we'd also see about 78-cent tax rate increase. So for that $100,000 homeowner who had a $410 credit, now they're going to get a $664 credit. Because again, it doesn't matter that that assessed value is gone, the tax rate goes up, they're still not paying more than $1,000. They're just getting a larger credit. And who pays for the larger credit? The schools, the county. And I calculated it. For the county, for instance, their circuit breaker needs $133. They're going from $70 to $133. So if you think about that, your circuit breaker is going to double again. So that's where you're going to lose money from losing Hoosier Energy. Because like I said earlier, when someone comes in, they pay more taxes and everyone else pays less taxes. When someone goes out, you lose those taxes and everyone pays more taxes, unless they're at the cap. Then they don't pay anymore, and you just get less. And that's kind of where you'll be with that huge of an impact. So that's where we need to think of ways to refill that tax base from the loss of Hoosier Energy, or think of other revenue sources, such as the TIF or the economic development payments.
And the increase in assessed valuation as the abatement goes off.
Yes, yeah, as the abatement rolls off, that will help fill in the loss from Hoosier Energy, but it will be a gradual increase.
What you also gotta figure in there is the loss of the income taxes and all those taxes.
Yeah.
Plus, when these people all lose their jobs, they're not gonna be able to make those $30-some thousand worth of tax payments that were made on time this time around.
Yeah, that's what, we talked about that as well, and I don't know how many people live in Vermilion County, work there. I don't know if it's a large percentage or not, but yeah, you just every person that loses their job that lives in Sullivan County, that's less income taxes that you're gonna receive. So you're gonna get hit from both sides, the property tax and the income tax.
Question, I talked to Deanne today, and you may have answered Wayne's question on the end of the SIF district, make up the same thing. When the personal property tax abatement is up, then what happens to the personal property tax number? Is it just,
Once the personal property abatement rolls off, that assessed value just gets added to the tax base to help reduce tax rates.
basically the same thing, different deal?
Right.
But we would still keep economic development after the abatement, correct, Jason?
The economic development payment, or you'll still keep the economic development payment,
Well,
or?
I'm saying, is say we agree to a 7-year abatement with this company, and we're gonna have, let's just say, I'm just throwing something out there, $800,000 coming in off economic development. Their 7-year abatement rolls over, they're done, we've got them back on full tax revenue. Will that, economic money still be, economic development money still coming for years to come?
The economic development payment, that's, the economic development payment will only, you only collect that as long as you negotiate it.
As long as you do the
Yeah.
abatement.
Yeah, well, no, it can be, it doesn't have to last as long as the
Oh,
abatement.
25 years, 30 years?
Yeah, you can do the economic development payment for 3 years or 4 years, and the abatement could last longer. We could structure it, you know, where we want a longer economic development payment.
Well, I'm just thinking, you know, something's gonna be here 20 to 50 years, and we're gonna get money for 3 or 4 years. And I understand we're gonna come down on our taxes some after that time, but
Right.
as far as new revenue, that's coming in for a few years, and that can disappear pretty quick.
Yeah. That's why that one county that I'm working with, they're willing to do a 20-year tax abatement 100% because they want 20 years of economic development payment. Now, that helps the county, that doesn't help the school, cities, and townships. So we have to weigh that as well. But they're thinking about maybe giving some to some of the other entities, some of their economic development payment to help offset that. Because they see that, you know, even from the schools, better get that dollar rather than a decrease in tax rate as well.
And are they maxed out on their levy?
Yes.
So that's the only way they can really.
Right, yeah, and, because that was, I did this analysis for them, and when they saw that, you know, this, you know, I can't remember how many millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, but when they saw that they weren't gonna collect any new revenue, they were floored, because they thought that, okay, this is a cash cow, we're gonna get all this new revenue, we're gonna be
A lot of
fine.
people here in the county that think the same thing.
And then when I showed them that, no, it's just gonna reduce your tax rates, you're not gonna get any real new money, then, they thought, well, that's not, what good is it? So then, when they started, and I did calculate to show that how much, reduction in circuit breaker losses there were going to be, but again, it wasn't, you know, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars versus millions. So that's something that we may wanna look at here, especially for the first couple of years, while Hoosier Energy, while they had that transition between, you know, coal to solar, as the abatements roll off, before you really see any major impact. Those are things that we may wanna look at internally.
Try to get economic development payments to offset the loss in taxes?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So we may wanna, you know, offer a little bit more tax abatement, but you pay a higher economic development payment.
I'd say the advantage for the company is where they take it on their taxes. They can.
Right, I mean, what I would, the way I phrase it is, you know, we expect the economic development payment because there's an opportunity cost of using all this land for so many years. We understand you want a tax abatement. We're willing to give you an additional tax abatement, more than what you're requesting, but what you would have paid in taxes, we want you to pay that in the economic development payment instead. So from the company standpoint, it's a wash. They don't care if it's property taxes or economic development taxes. They're gonna pay the same, it's just how you receive it's gonna be a lot different.
Well, probably the difference in where the money comes from is when they file their company taxes.
Well, that's true.
Federal taxes, where it comes out of, how much deduction they get out of it.
That is true,
Probably the difference.
if it's economic development or property taxes, but you're right, how they file it, but I let their accountants worry about that. But I'll tell you what, if we go that route, what I'm gonna push for, and I've done in other counties, some successful, some not, is, your tax rate has increased a little bit each year. So I'm gonna put an inflation, a factor on the property taxes. So I'm not gonna say that the tax rate stays flat for 20 years or 10 years. I'm gonna say, okay, you probably would have paid 2% more each year. So we want your economic development payment to increase by 2% each year. So that's something I'm gonna negotiate on your behalf to try to maximize what we can give.
The bottom line is, if we do nothing, we get nothing. Right?
You'll get new assessed value,
Yeah.
but you won't get as much as what we can,
Right.
yeah. If the more active and proactive we are, the more we can get. Yeah.
Is there a question may have been asked somewhere before, is there a tax you can put on this commodity that they're selling? No?
I think we asked that attorney that was in here, and he said he had another county that was looking at billing for every kilowatt produced, and he was looking into it.
We have not. There has been, some discussions where one company, maybe two, have offered to, give like part of the profits, to the community. That's something we could look at. My only hesitant there is, then you're arguing about what's profits. There's a number of ways to come up with that calculation, and then if you're fighting about it. But you're right, Rick did say there is another county that's looking at that. We haven't seen that yet, but I'm not saying it's not possible.
And if you negotiate a payment, it's guaranteed, or if you look at profits, you never know what that's gonna be.
Right.
Exactly. I'd rather get it up front than renegotiating
Yeah,
every year.
especially, this is not my specialty, I don't know how efficient solar panels are, but I've heard they're not, as efficient. I'm guessing over time they become less efficient, so whatever they're generating, that's probably gonna decrease over time. So, if you charge them, that could decrease over time as well.
Question, kind of to allude to what that guy said about say you get a hailstorm, tornado comes through, wipes them all out. What do you do about reassessing all that when they replace all that and bring in new value?
That's something else that we can negotiate, because hasn't been that many solar farms yet that have been around. They're all really under construction or kind of discussions. But I know for wind farms, one of our big concerns was, and what was happening is, you have a company come in there, make their investment, and then sell it to another company, and they're usually selling it, pennies on the dollar. So they reevaluate it. So we can also negotiate that their assessed value doesn't fall below a certain amount. So that way, with the decommissioning, you can have in your agreement that if your panels aren't working for a certain period of time, that are required to replace them, you can have those kind of things. But we can also put it in that their value won't fall below a certain amount. That way, if they do sell it to another company, they can't reevaluate it for pennies on the dollar, and you get a lot less than what we anticipate on the assessed value side. It wouldn't change the economic development payments, because that would be set from day one. But again, part of the value is the increase in assessed value, so we want to make sure we get that as well.
From what I've seen, that's pretty well given.
They're going to sell. So that's why we try to put that minimum in there, so it protects you from value going down.
That's something we learned from the last time.
Another thing that we would like to see put in any kind of agreement that they have with the county is that they keep our emergency responders trained, because typically they plant native grasses under the panels, and you know how dry it can get in Indiana in late summer, and we're concerned with fires and things like that. And so the companies that we have talked with have said in other places that they have facilities, that they have that in their wording, that they will pay up to a certain amount per year to pay for the emergency responder training.
And I'm assuming you'll have language in there that the property returns to its normal state, that they remove gravel, roads, lanes, etc.
Yeah, that's kind of with the attorneys and I think the highway department will have those kinds of language in there. There is also a road use agreement. There's an economic development agreement, that's a decommissioning agreement. So, after the 20, 30 years, and there's a road use agreement.
Understanding that the county commissioners and
landowners will have their own agreement as well.
And I would hope that some of these landowners take their contracts to an attorney and have them looked at and make sure that they know what they're getting into, because a couple of them has had troubles, and they are sitting in attorneys' offices right now trying to get negotiations made.
You know, a lot of battery storage and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Batteries are on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
I talk a lot about who's energy department and local schools. Fairbanks area, as the commission talked about that 15% as the going to back to the redevelopment, be giving any percentage back to the schools.
That was what Jason had told me, and I didn't even know that was even possible to designate that to go to the school. And Farmersburg has an economic development group, a redevelopment group, and Don Ransford had called me and asked if it could designate to go to the schools. And at that time, I told him I didn't think there was a way to do that. And then after talking with Jason, I found out that there was a way to designate that right to the schools. So if it is set up in a typical in that area, and I'm sure Southwest School Corporation's gonna ask the same, you know, when it's set up in their district, but yeah, infrastructure improvements are gonna be a tough thing for the county to fund without something like TIF in place. I would like to see each of these solar farms be made a tax increment financing district. Well, we're already gonna be doing the paperwork to make it an allocation area and an economic development area if they get an abatement. So I'd like to see it made a TIF area as well, where that's a possibility to get that sent through to schools. I mean, that's our future of our whole county. We gotta make sure the schools are funded.
Economic development is the only place you can put an assessment, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Economic development agreement.
The minimum assessment?
With the solar company, that's the only place that you can add a separate assessment. You can't negotiate it for some of the other councils and stuff like that. It can only go to economic development.
We wouldn't just go to this board. It would be a countywide economic development agreement payment. It wouldn't be just us controlling.
Yeah, but it all has to run through this board, correct, in order to disperse that?
Not necessarily. It could be set to where the commissioners and council have to agree to how it's dispersed, and we may not have any say in it whatsoever. Just tax increment financing goes through this board.
Yeah, the economic development payment would go through the council or commissioners depending on how it's set up. It probably, I mean, I guess it could go through the redevelopment commission, but I've not seen it done that way.
And as far as your meeting in Fairbanks, there's no facility within Fairbanks area that can handle a meeting, I don't assume, is there?
Fairbanks Community Center built school.
The old school?
There's actually been a representative of the solar company that is looking in that area that has toured that facility to see if it would be adequate for a public meeting, and it was. But then I would like to also have them have an additional one at our 4-H fairgrounds, where it's big enough for everybody in the whole county.
Any other questions, or hopefully this has been helpful?
Very helpful.
Yeah, Jason, how many, companies do you LLC to start up? Won't just go like 10, 3, 4 years and sell off to a sister company, another LLC that it's affiliated with? It's a pretty high percentage, isn't it, that we're doing that now?
Yeah, I don't know for the solar farms, but like I said, there's so many of them right now. They're just kind of starting, so there's not a long history yet. Even the wind farms, I don't even know what the percentage was, but I could just tell by talking to them that even the negotiations, they're already thinking about, in a couple of years they're going to be selling.
Right.
So that's when I started thinking we need to put in a minimum because protect the county.
So it's gonna be an ongoing thing for us, I mean, it's most likely within 5 years, you sold it off, and
Yeah, I always think, you know, worst case scenario, or what can we do to protect if the worst thing happens, and that'd be the worst thing for them to sell off, so let's do what we can to protect, whether it happens or not.
And the other thing with local labor, a lot of these companies probably got sister companies that they can have come and install these, so they're paying themselves to install their own equipment.
Yeah, that's where I'd work with the attorney on how we can beef up that language, because that's something I really don't know. Because, you know, you're right, they have their people already, and how easy is it, can they say that, hey, you know, we looked and you guys, Sullivan County doesn't have the expertise, how do you, you know, fight that? I don't know that, I defer to the attorneys on that. But no, but I do know that every time that we work with, that comes up, and we do ask them, and they say they're going to try. How do you get them to, how hard is it to try? I don't know. But I think we can do whatever we can put in the documents to do that.
Well, the solar farms out there now have been advertising for somebody to do mowing and stuff, wanting bids and stuff, but there again, does anybody in Sullivan County have the, you know, even though you've got a mowing business, maybe you don't, you know, you're gonna have a lawyer write up the bid form, you know? So I mean, how do they decide? We're using somebody out of Terre Haute, Brazil. Green County.
Yep.
So I don't know whether they've got anybody new, or I don't know who's doing it, but
Well,
it'd be nice if somebody in Sullivan County could get that job.
They don't, they're taking the bids till the 14th
Yeah.
of this month. So,
I-
whether it's gonna be somebody this year, or,
It was advertised in the paper,
Yeah.
Jason.
But I mean, that's how those businesses get around it sometimes, is they say, well, you know, we need a bond, we need this, we need that. You know, maybe local people don't wanna put up $1 million bond, so they go out and do a 2-week job, or, you know.
I can tell you how they mowed the one at Dale last year, they put goats in it, that's how they mowed it.
or that, well, they said they didn't like goats because they get on top of the barrel.
Sheep was the best.
Sheep was the best.
Sheep is the best. And some of the companies we've talked to said that there are places that they specifically have those agreements that they will run sheep and cut down on the
Chicken.
control.
Chicken.
Chickens made too much of a mess over there.
Anything to get up on it to roost, they don't wanna do.
Jason, thanks for coming down.